Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Laurel Heenan. I will be the moderator for the AMA today with Mik. Our first question is from Joseph. When we talk about value streams, are we talking about the value stream that delivers value to external or internal customers, or also development value streams? Also,
Yes.
do we have a hierarchy of value streams such as enterprise or strategic, operational, sub-operational, etc.?
Yeah, so the answer is definitely yes. And I think that something that's really important is often, especially sort of the larger and frankly just older organizations tend to be, the more I find that they're over fixated on the external value streams, whereas digital natives will have often started realizing how important those development and internal and platform and API value streams are. So I think the part of the key journey of project to product is actually to elevate those internal value streams, make them first-class products, which means they have their own roadmaps. They have their own, you have a sense of their capacity. If they tend to be bottlenecks, by the way, if they haven't been first class. So you'll have shared services and APIs and data platforms and the like actually bottlenecking your business and customer facing products. And so what we need to do, in my view, is think of sort of these three core layers of value streams where you've got everyone sort of understands the business and customer facing ones. And sometimes those are internal customers, right? If it's an internal reporting system, you've got an internal customer. And so both internal and external customers for those. Then you've actually got the platform value streams. Those are the shared services, the APIs, analytics pipelines, and the like. And then we actually have to treat our tool chain and developer tools themselves as a value stream. And companies who invest, companies who thrive realize how important developer productivity is and the productivity of all sort of IT and technology staff. And so we need to provide them with first-rate tooling, first-rate product experience as well. So really think of all those three as being their own value streams, having their own investment, having their own roadmaps, and each of them, and actually as you're measuring flow, you'll see that if you've underinvested in any of them, they'll become bottlenecks for what's above. And technology companies tend to invest a lot more down at the lower layers of developer tooling, of operations tooling and automation, of platforms and APIs, than companies who've actually not realized how much of a bottleneck those could be. So the really key shift is actually is to make those platform value streams and the development value streams be first class citizens. So.
Awesome. Our next question is from Bill Annabelle, and his question is, what are some of the anti-patterns that you've seen to avoid when implementing value stream management?
Yeah, so, and by the way, feel free, like if any follow up on questions, raise your hand or just start speaking, whatever works well. So in terms of the anti-patterns, I think having the sort of the perfect portfolio or PowerPoint slide of every value stream defined. I think the key thing is to understand it. And of course, people also can be tricky, especially if you've got large organizations with hundreds or thousands of applications, let's say, to know where to start. Are the value streams the applications? Are they the business value streams, the offerings that we provide to our customers or business associates? And really to understand that the starting point of value streams is people, right? So like this is software, digital is our knowledge work. People do that work. Value streams should be teams of teams, and it's really a question of how you match up those teams of teams. So basically between 1 and 10, say Agile teams, to the work intake. But those are your value streams, and they're there today. And when things are very poorly aligned, so you've got one team supporting 40 applications, 30 of which are legacy, then you have very unproductive and often unhappy teams. When you've got good alignment, or you might have a really big misalignment between the team structure and the software architecture. So it makes it very difficult for teams to actually make changes without having dependencies on other teams or other parts of the organization or infrastructure. So really just think of it as a incremental, and I think the key thing is a data-driven journey. So you're looking at flow, you're understanding what's the current state today. If we actually map out the way teams work right now, if we look at their flow, what does it look like today? What are their dependencies? And then you're looking at taking incremental steps to say, okay, well, maybe all those legacy applications this team is doing, we should move over here and start sunsetting them. And actually, then you start thinking, okay, those parts of the portfolio, they're less important, they're declining. Let's start, looking at doing something different with them, so the team can focus on the work that's going to drive the most business value, which is maybe these 10 different applications, which is maybe more the mobile side of things or something of that sort. So yeah, I think the key thing is the anti-patterns are that I see very frequently is just sort of over fixating on what the how to start basically and what the value streams are, and then the way to get past that is just to realize the value streams are they're people, they're your teams and teams of teams.
Awesome. I have a question from the chat that is there a particular phase or where value stream definition fits best in traditional architectural models versus SAFe? Is it simply during requirements definition?
Yeah, so I think that, and here's an interesting thing with project to product and the flow framework, is it doesn't actually, I think we all realize Agile is better than not being Agile, and Agile allows you to deliver value more incrementally than Waterfall. But the flow framework doesn't say you can't measure Waterfall value streams or you can't measure the flow requirements. Because in the end, you're just measuring flow. If you've got requirements management and Waterfall, you'll just basically have very long flow times. Right? You might have 3, 6, 9-month flow times. But it's still important to measure them. It's still important to see if an underinvestment technical debt in that particular flow is actually causing things to get delayed, let's say, right? Things were meant to be delivered in 6 months, and now it is going to be 9 months. So I would start at whatever your process is today. Really, the approach is just to start measuring the flow. I think one of the biggest anti-patterns I would say is we need to be 100% agile before we measure flow. That's like that's just a recipe for getting nowhere, right? You never, I don't know, maybe others are 100% agile, whatever 100% agile is, but you want to measure flow as end-to-end as possible. You want to be as end-to-end as agile as possible. In the end, we all want business agility. And then to do that, we actually need to understand what our current state is today, because that will guide that journey. That'll allow us to understand, should we invest more in bringing Agile and DevOps to the, more the right side of the value stream, where we're really releasing and operating software, or should we invest more in upfront in the way that we're actually collaborating with business partners or consuming feedback from customers? So I think, the key thing is just to make sure that whatever your starting point is, and if it's business analysis and requirements, that's where your value stream starts. That's where your value stream starts, right? In some cases, it'll be projects, right? The value stream will start with project execution starting, and that's okay too. We want to measure that so that you've got the data to say, okay, well, the project plans didn't actually account for tech debt, and that's a really big problem, because that looks like it's actually going to make us miss our project deadline. So within that project umbrella, let's make sure that we're actually applying some product principles and product thinking to make sure that we're building software in a modern way. So.
May I ask a few questions?
Yeah. Hi, Joseph.
First of all, Mik, I am extremely happy that you made your very valuable time and discuss this very important topic that almost probably every major and serious organization is considering to go value stream way. Tim, when I do value stream mapping, for my organization, it is a multi-billion, multi-thousand people organization. So my development value streams basically trim down to few things: intake, prioritize, design, system integration, UAT, performance, and deployment. That's my development value stream. Now, when we say define this value or identify this development value stream, the only ways that I can define them would be that what initiatives, what projects will be flying through them. So that subset of the initiatives or projects or items or portfolio, whatever you call, basically that will define the name for that value stream for me, whether it's a consumer's value streams, whether it's internal or external. That would be the subset of the initiatives that I decide to allocate to that value stream. And the budget, the individual budget of these individual initiatives or projects will define the cumulative, how to say, funding for that value stream as well. So my question, I think, is that it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. I'm looking for where is the complexity is lying. Is the complexity about the approach or that intentional selection of what initiatives will be flying through this value stream? Is that the complexity? I'm trying the last few days on, and for your information, Mik, like you, I also did my PhD around the value streams and organizational design. And I was a professor for many years, and still I'm part-time professor at San Jose State University. I fully understand the operational value stream, like the customer facing, the interactions, like from trigger. And when it comes to development value stream, it is very trivial. And that's where I raised in suspicions that maybe it's not that trivial. That's my question to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Joseph. Yeah, I think it's so that's an important question. And I wanted to make one distinction is, I realized that the Scaled Agile framework, for example, makes this very clear distinction between the business value streams and the development or operational value streams. The flow framework notably doesn't. Of course, you know, the flow framework and the flow metrics haven't incorporated into SAFe. So, and the bottom line is you do have large organizations with separated business and development value streams, right? Now, I do want to keep in mind that you've got a lot of digital natives and technology companies that don't make that same distinction, right? The business, and I think that's kind of the power of being digital natives is that the business and the development value streams are one. So now, of course, that's not necessarily the starting concept, the starting point. So the way I look at it, and we can dig further into this, because I do think this is a really key topic in terms of getting this right. I think a great state to end up at is that you've got these, fundamentally, again, you've got these, let's say that development value stream, which you described very well. And what we want to do is we want to fund capacity of that. And the challenge is when we're funding projects that are then allocating resources within that value stream, we're ignoring the fact that again, that this shift from project to product is about fundamentally funding the value stream, which is needs to be a stable set of people who, if we increase funding of it, we're then going to be able to onboard more people. But it's not as simple as, again, you know, assuming that people are cogs that you can add to a machine. They're not, right? They take time to ramp up. Teams take time to gel and to start performing. So, and this notion that we can actually take a development value stream and add, let's say it costs $10 million today, add $5 million and get 5 more millions out of it for the next 6 months is just broken. Things don't work that way, right? That's where you accrue these, you get into these tech debt spirals because none of the right architecture was created to actually support the value stream and the like. So I think the key thing is, now that said, I think a lot of organizations, especially the larger ones, are stuck with the fact that you've got basically projects being funded as these initiatives in the business value stream, and then the work is getting taken in by the development value stream, right? So if that's the starting point, I think, again, an approach, but I'd like to get your feedback on this is that try, if you can, to fund capacity and to actually plan to capacity, to understand the capacity in terms of flow items on that value stream. So features, defects, risks, and debts. Right? Because the problem with those project-funded initiatives, that the debts are nowhere to be seen because no one ever really funds those, but they're a core part of our work. And it's really, so it's this translation exercise. By the way, I've seen it work effectively. So you take that work intake of all those projects. I'm not saying this is the way to do it or the way that digital natives or tech companies do it, but if it's the starting point, I've seen it improve. So basically take those projects, you turn them into roadmaps, right? Those initiatives are then turned into roadmaps. Most of them are features or business epics or something. That roadmap also has, of course, the time for it needs to have debts and risks on it as well. It needs to understand the capacity that's going to go to defect work and rework. And if that's been neglected, more capacity is going to go to that. So there'll be less work for the initiatives. And so the key thing is for that value stream, if you're looking, and if, you know, let's say we're in the scaled agile mode, but however you're doing planning, we're looking at that next quarter, that next PI. Now, of course, the funding could be annual, but we can extrapolate that as well. So what you say, here's our current capacity. And it's really important. This is where the flow framework is such a helpful guide. You should know your historical capacity because it'll be based on the flow. And this is actually, again, why the flow metrics are a core part of SAFe right now. So we can, if we look back at 3 months, at the trailing 12 months, here, given our flow distribution of features, defects, risks, and debts, here's was our capacity for features. All the project initiatives are being funded on new features, but here's our capacity. So we now, and of course, the challenge always is that there's a mismatch between the demand that's coming from either a business value stream or a project plan and the capacity of the value stream. And if there's not, everyone's happy and we don't need to have these AMAs because everything's working nicely. So we then, what we need to do is we need to look at that and then how are we going to increase that capacity, right? One way to increase that capacity is to say, okay, well, if technical debt is the bottleneck, we need to invest in technical debt and measure that investment by the additional feature capacity that's been there. But the planning needs to be done to the capacity that's available so that some of that investment fundamentally will need to go into investment in whether it's enablers, it's platforms, it's APIs, things that make it easy, that allow us to increase capacity. Some of that can be by adding teams to the value stream. That can happen as well, adding additional resources. But of course, then we need to bake in, based on ideally the historical flows that we've seen, how long it takes that new team, whether it's in-house, whether it's not, to actually contribute to the flow, because usually it'll be more than 3 months, right? It's not, and in many cases it's 6 months before they're meaningfully contributing to the flow of the value stream. So fundamentally, it's, I guess, if Joseph is answering your questions, to translate the way work is coming in when it's not product oriented, which will just be ranking on a backlog or roadmap, to translate that into a roadmap, to make sure that the roadmap has features, defects, risks, and debts on it, because capacity is being taken for each of those. To keep doing your prioritization the way it's happening, right? You're using weighted search up first, however that work is being prioritized, to keep doing that, but fundamentally to understand what the current capacity of the value stream is, and then how we improve that capacity. So.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I like when you also commented that then more native or technology oriented. That was also one of the comments which I made upon registrations, that most likely in technology-oriented organization, there is no distinction, or there is no huge distinction between operational or business and development, because they are pretty much probably the same or near to the same. I like that one. And also I love that you emphasized a couple of times that it says that development value streams are now becoming the first-class citizen, because in fact, when you talk about value delivery, the vehicle for delivery of that value is those features and those capabilities, enable whatever you, and those happen only through your development value. They do not happen through your business value stream. Business value stream is basically that surface. I like that part. Thank you very much, Tim. Again, I will probably not take too much time. I know that many questions. I will, of course, after this webinar, also see how I can interact with you about, because we are in the midst of doing like enterprise-wide value stream mapping. That means that reorganize the entire enterprise around value streams eventually. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, looking forward to that follow-up, Joseph.
Thank you.
Awesome. We have another question in the chat. Dhruti, would you like to ask Mik out loud, or would you like me to ask?
Either way is fine. Thank you, team, again for the time. So my question is, how is value stream aligned when there are two agile frameworks practiced in one organization?
Well, I could think again, what are the two frameworks?
Actually, there are practiced like 3, but on the top of my head, there are one part of the organization is practicing SAFe and one is trying lean. And when like the fundamental principles are to focus on operation, business versus development, how these two frameworks could be aligned in terms of value streams. So because technology is highly focusing on DevOps, we are focusing on lean, whereas the product side development is focusing on SAFe. And when, of course, there will be frequently cases where both has to converge. And so I'm thinking how these could be mapped out.
Yeah.
So it is flawless value delivery.
Yeah. So I think the key thing is if you've got, and this happens, by the way, because there are different scenarios, right? You've got different Agile frameworks being used. You might have different parts of a technology stack where, I know, one team is working on-prem, another team is working with Azure or something, right? And you've got maybe separation between two different parts of the business or lines of business. You've got people using different tools. Like when teams work in different Agile tools, that actually tends to create a bit of a siloing effect. So I think the key thing is that whenever you've got this kind of inherent separation in the organizational design, or at least in the way the organization's operating, is just to treat those as separate value streams. But as I said sort of at the start, is even if you've got sort of and by the way, this happens all the time, right? Most organizations at scale, you'll have some people working with SAFe, some people working with Kanban, some people telling them that they don't want to change in the way they're working at all, and then some in Waterfall, right? So just make sure that those are at least measured and managed as separate value streams, because even if it's a single team, because they really will have different ways of working. And the key thing with the flow metrics, right, is that we want every value stream to be able to understand its own flow metrics. So what's its flow time? How long is it taking to get time to market? And what's interesting is some of the very sort of Kanban-oriented ones, where let's say it's more the operations side teams or something, or the teams building platforms, they might have super short flow times, right? They might be working on very small increments to a platform or environments, and their flow times could be like a few days, and they're doing work in Kanban with very little planning. So we just want to make sure that they can keep, just let them keep doing that, while you might have much more structured work for something that's a really big business initiative, where the big room planning is critical and all of that. And then it's, chances are it's okay for those to have a longer flow time. Like their flow time won't be days, but hopefully it's no longer than a sprint, right? Kind of the goal should be that your flow times are under sprint, so you're building that feedback, and definitely under the course of a PI or a release iteration. So I think, yeah, just basically treat them as separate value streams and make sure that they're each setting their flow metrics according to how they're working, and then to the Agile methodology that they're applying.
One more follow-up questions, please. So yeah. How is the dependencies and risks are managed to increase efficiencies between those two?
Yeah, right. Okay, so I think that the key thing is that dependencies between the teams, once you've sort of found some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of bottlenecks, such as inefficient processes upstream of teams, like the way that work is handed over to teams, or the way that UAT is done, to Joseph's point early on, if it's done really late, well, guess what? That's going to affect your flow in a dramatic way when something's rejected, and then you're all of a sudden, your next window's 3 months later, and you thought that it was going into production this release. So there are these process improvements need to happen. There's automation and DevOps that tends to be downstream of the Agile team that needs to happen. So that's a significant investment. But once there's one of the most frequent things we see is too much WIP and overload on the teams. So there's just and this is, by the way, back to Joseph's point, this tends to be what we were talking about with Joseph, misalignment of capacity to demand, where there's just the backlogs are way too big, the teams are way overloaded, and their flow efficiency tanks. So there's those kinds of improvements. But finally, when an organization is actually past improving some of those things, it is the dependencies between the teams that tend to be the main bottlenecks. And so the bottom line is you're always managing those dependencies, and that never stops. And all that the flow framework helps you do is to have data for that, because some of the dependencies are more obvious, where we've been waiting for this API for 6 weeks and we can't get anything done, and we've been working around as well as we can. But some of them are more systemic, which is we've grossly underinvested in our platform team, or we've outsourced something that really was core, and everything depends on it. So I think just think of those sort of direct dependencies between teams, and in some cases those are evident, but so often they are actually more systemic issues between value streams or these bigger bottlenecks, right? We just went to cloud. We didn't train anyone on AWS. well, that'll be a bottleneck very quickly. So yeah, looking for those things, and then, but then, by the way, and David, you're laughing, but we've probably all been through this. Then, by the way, of course, the cloud team or the infrastructure team is getting blamed, and so that looks like it's the dependency, but we didn't give training to any of the teams consuming their services. So yeah, so it's use flow to spot those things, because the trickier ones are cross team, cross value stream.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, our next question is, even when Agile teams deliver value faster at better quality levels and with better customer satisfaction, our leaders still say, how can you prove that this is due to Agile? All while their Waterfall programs continue to deliver late, over budget, and with a lot of overtime. Leaders seem to be too busy for training, so how can we help them see what is right in front of them?
Yeah, so this is, I think, now just one of the #1 problems we all have. And until there's leadership, and I definitely have noticed myself speaking more and more to this every chance I get, until there's leadership support and capacity allocated for continuous improvement, it's just not going to happen. So I think we've all been beating our heads against this in various ways. The thing I've been saying for the past half year to a year is, if you don't have an objective or an OKR or some kind of KPI around measuring and allocating time to improvement that's sponsored at a senior leadership level, it just won't get better. So, and if you do, it will. It might not get better as quickly as you like, but it will. So my suggestion for this, but happy to hear what others think here is let's say you're using OKRs or using some kind of objective setting. There needs to be a top level objective for your line of business, for your whole company, around improvement. And so saying a cross-company flow time reduction initiative or a flow efficiency initiative is a great way to do that, because fundamentally that just gives the time and the capacity at the top level for teams to take that and say, okay, here's how we want to improve. Here are the experiments we want to run. Here are the problems that we think we have. Until there's, and this just for me goes back to that Gene Kim's quote in the Phoenix Project, is that the improvement of daily work is as important as daily work. Like, I mean, everyone says it, but until you actually make it a core part of your strategy, I think companies will often make employee engagement a core part of their strategy. Well, if employees are sort of overburdened, if everyone's always playing catch up and there's no time for improvement, how are your employee engagements going to go up? And by the way, when we measure flow at organizations, we regularly see that as you allocate time to improvement, flow improves. So more work gets done, more features go out the door, more security risks are resolved, and so on. And then as flow accelerates, employee engagement improves. Right? So trying to improve employee engagement for technical staff without allocating time and priority to improvement, I think it's futile. And there's different kinds of improvement, right? Some that needs to be through training, through upskilling, through all those things. But what the flow framework does, so how you do it is really up to you and how you're helping organizations, and others are as well. But I think the thing that you can use as a catalyst is to set a top level objective or OKR of improving flow, because that will force these conversations and it'll force this stuff to get prioritized. And then, yeah, I would just allocate significant bandwidth, whether you take 10 or 20% to tech debt reduction and improvement initiatives of every single cycle that you're planning. And it's easy to, it's easy to get caught up in not doing that as well, right? Because if the teams always feel like they're behind, the backlogs are too big, we all get caught in this place. But unless we give that space, it just gets worse, not better. So we have to look at, on the course of a single quarter or release cycle, yeah, maybe we'll get a bit more done, but the next one will get even less, and the one after that even less. And if you just take the point of view of where we want to be 6 or 9 or 12 months from now, or the organization does and leadership does, it definitely makes it much more clear how important it is to prioritize these continuous improvement initiatives and tech debt work, or just all debt work. Fundamentally, it's all debt.
Great. All right, the next question we have is, in the journey of disrupting the status quo, there are a lot
Actually,
of...
and I'm gonna, sorry,
Go ahead.
Laurel, it's just, I'm not great at paying attention to the chat because I'm trying to pay attention to everybody, but I did see this question come up, the psychological safety, get rid of the blame. That's really important, right? Because I think the thing with measuring flow is, if you're measuring flow to say, Marina, there you are, thank you. If you start measuring flow and everyone is worried about, showing that things are bottlenecked or slow, you'll never get to the point of improvement. The whole point is showing that things are bottlenecked and slow, so that you can actually prioritize that improvement. And so leadership also needs to give the psychological safety for teams and value streams to be able to show their metrics, and to be able to create to always focus on improving them. And guess what? If they're looking terrible, well, that should make improvement a whole lot easier, right? So it's really, this is another thing that's been dawning on me more, is it's if those things look at, and the Bank of New Zealand people had when they talked about their adoption of the flow framework at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, they talked about this, right? If things are looking really bad, again, we should at least briefly celebrate that, because we've got a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then we we address that low-hanging fruit, and our teams will be happier. But if you don't have the psychological safety to surface that, then you're just dead in the water.
Good for the
Thank you for pointing that out. We actually, so I work for GM, and we were just did a psychological safety thing right before I had this meeting. And I just wanted to say that because there was someone that told their story about the country they were from, and how, it's always discouraged to admit that you made a mistake or that you don't know how to do something. And I think that's what's inhibiting flow a lot in teams. And I see that a lot, even as I'm teaching classes for the Scaled Agile framework, that people don't want to admit to their managers they're overburdened.
Yeah.
And then they just think Agile is something being done to them,
yeah,
and not something that can help their flow, because we don't have this piece in place.
Yeah, exactly. And so Dominica de Grandes does, I think, a much better job than me talking about this and psychological safety. But I think just the bottom line is, I think it's required. I did have this, and maybe Laura can send that after. I did a Project to Product podcast with her on how important this was, because we were seeing this everywhere, right? We were seeing a team who in this one organization could just refuse to show their metrics until they were 100% agile and their metrics looked good. And then the SVP response was saying, but then how are we going to help you and give you resources if you're waiting for that? Because that's the goal of this, is we actually help you and find those dependencies, and maybe some of them are that you need more staff or something of that sort. So yeah, and I think, but also the important thing with the flow metrics is we don't, and this is why they don't even go down to I sort of discourage having it going down to even to the team level. The teams have their own metrics, they have their own agile metrics, right? But these flow metrics are meant to be at the team of teams level, where pointing a finger at an individual it just makes no sense. Now, Rena, of course, that might mean that the owner of that value stream, like this example I just gave, they might not want to show their metrics because their metrics might not look good and might not look good in someone else's. And fundamentally, I think and I alluded to this a bit at the start, is comparing between different value streams is you always have some apples and oranges. They're working on different technology stacks. They have different types of customers and so on. So it's really, they need autonomy for their own metrics, but we need to see them because we need to see the dependencies between them. And it's not that like one value streams, if they have a flow time of 50 days and another one has a flow time of 10 days, that doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other. The whole goal, we just want to help both improve. And maybe one of them, if their flow time is 14 days, we don't even want to help them run their flow time. We just want to look at their flow efficiency and where they're getting stuck and where their toil comes from. So I think it's what I'm seeing is that not doing the metrics at that team level, where the teams just need their own metrics, but doing it at the value stream level actually makes this a bit easier, because it just removes again that finger pointing at individuals or teams. But that said, there still needs to be enough psychological safety for people to feel comfortable doing it.
All right, time for the next question. I feel like this one ties into what we've been talking about a bit, but it's in the journey of disrupting the status quo, there are a lot of businesses within an organization that get impacted and end up creating a sense of instability among employees. what would you suggest to build or regain confidence? For example, we see a lot of attrition in the industry, which causes panic and chaos on both the employer and the employee too.
Yeah, so I think just having it, I think the goal around flow, right down to the personal level, where we kind of all want our own flow, and less distraction, less interruption, but it really is in support of making the individual contributors and teams' lives easier. And when you, again, and this goes back to prioritizing that, right? When the teams feel and the individuals feel like it gets harder and harder to get work done and to be successful, they start answering recruiters, and they start looking on LinkedIn, and because it feels like things are getting worse. But as soon as it feels like things are getting better, like the organization's invested in making their day-to-day easier, things change, right? You just end up with more hope that things will improve and that your ability to contribute in the organization will improve. So I think there's quite a bit of data around this, right? Like we know, for example, that underinvestment in software architecture and too much tech debt reduces the happiness of developers and other IT specialists. And there's some great data out there that if you have sort of like poor modularity and coupling, people tend to leave organizations more. Developers will leave organizations because it just gets harder to do their craft. So I think the key thing is showing that you're investing in these things. And of course, it's always a balance when you feel like you're behind on the business objectives or plans or projects for that matter. But again, allocating time towards that, and then people feeling like things are getting better, like they had a chance to address that shortcuts or those 40 shortcuts they made to get the last release out the door. That feeling of things getting better absolutely helps with retention. And it just comes back to creating a healthy organization that has a balanced investment technology. And I think now more than ever, with what's happening with talent, that's absolutely critical, because there's just been the sheer amount of startups and technology companies that need technical talent has just exploded, even more so in the last couple of years. So probably due to stimulus and then these other things. So I think this is just becoming more important than ever. And again, the way that you get the people on the value streams bought into this, it is through this improvement. And then of course, at the same rate, we need that improvement to be measurable and accountable to the business. We can't be building fun AI frameworks on the side just for developers to be happy. We actually need that to contribute to the business. So making sure that, I think that this is the key thing to strike the balance, is that all tech debt investment is actually in support of a business outcome. The business outcome might be faster flow because that delivers more business value, gets the teams more engaged and happier, or it might be, I don't know, let's say you're moving to cloud, it might be in support of using smarter cloud services to reduce the operating cost of your application portfolio. And that's a very clear business outcome. So I think the key thing is to connect those two things, is to connect flow to business outcomes, because fundamentally that's how you get the business sponsorship and organization sponsorship for it. And I think everyone's in the organization said, well, no, we need to invest in like that, we need to invest like that. But when it falls on deaf ears, it's often because it's not connected directly to the business outcome it will drive.
Are there any questions before I proceed with asking more? All right. So Mik, I'm going to give you a two-part question, but I think the answer will all kind of combine into one. And that is, can you please give an example of OKRs and how they've helped an organization, perhaps Tasktop? Is it worth trying to start these at a grassroots level without C-level buy-in? And then what tips do you have for ensuring the right people are involved in setting OKRs and to quell groups from heading in the direction of too much business outcome focus at the expense of improvement outcomes?
That sounds like three questions. So I'll take the middle one first, which is easiest, but yes, it's worth starting at the grassroots level. I don't see any reason not to. It's going to be how a team connects itself to its business outcomes. I think it's great for it to come from the grassroots level. Oftentimes it doesn't. I do think the OKRs, so one of the pitfalls of OKRs, and I've been speaking a lot, if you go to project.bar.org/speaking, There's on the top left, there's a fairly recent doc of OKRs, but yeah, Laurel, we should probably get one of the more recent ones up. Because I think it's such an important topic. So I think OKRs are, in terms of, there's lots of ways to mess them up, by the way, which I present in the talk. Fundamentally, I think they are, they're a great way to prioritize flow and to prioritize improvement. And so the problem with OKRs is when they're only the financial and business metrics, right? Because then the teams are too disconnected from them. But if you make an OKR around flow, that's a leading indicator of a business metric. Let's say if we improve our flow velocity, we think we'll get a better star ratings or in the App Store. Those are great things to test out. So so the flow metrics are designed, and the flow frame, by the way, was designed because I've been doing OKRs at Tasktop for this, it's our 10th year now. That's always, every year we learn something interesting about them and how to connect them to flow, but they're meant to be leading indicators of business outcomes that are meaningful to the teams, right? The teams understand that, again, if they have an OKR around tech debt reduction, there should be an objective around, and by the way, so the objective should be around, let's say, faster innovation. Then you can have a key result around reducing tech debt, and another key result in terms of how that's going to accelerate flow or increase capacity or increase. On the last OKR we said is actually balance of tech debt and increased happiness, right? Increased employee net promoter scores at Tasktop. This is just from this week. We were finalizing some of our OKRs for some of our value streams. And this one was important enough that it's organizational, right? This tech debt investment, but also measured by employee happiness. Because of course, when we reduce tech debt, we're happier, and then happy employees, guess what? They produce more business value as well, which helps. And then the retention improves and so on. So I think, yeah, I highly encourage using them. I highly encourage using them, even if they're not an organizational standard. And then for those of you who have organizations who are contemplating them, just get flow as a way of measuring improvement and prioritizing improvement. Try to get into the company or the line of business or your division's OKRs. It's, again, it can be a great catalyst for making that time. And by the way, there are other interesting aspects of OKRs. And Laurel, maybe you can point to the podcast with Felipe Castro, because as an example, if your flow time, how long it takes you to deliver value, is over 90 days, you can't use OKRs for technology, for IT. Because OKRs are based on a quarterly cycle. And so Felipe Castro himself said this, like, you actually then have to reduce your flow time to be under 90 days, which of course has all sorts of other benefits. And then you can adopt OKRs. Otherwise, your feedback cycle is too slow. You're not going to know whether what you delivered is actually drove an improvement or it didn't. So yeah, I think it's a good match and can be a very effective catalyst.
Excellent. The Felipe Castro podcast is being released next week, so everyone can keep an eye out for that shortly.
Well, there's the webinar.
I can point to the webinar. I can put that in the chat.
I just saw the link. I have it right now because I just asked for it. Here, I'll put it in. Here we go.
All right. Next question. How would you engage finance or accounting in an open discussion about changing legacy funding models?
Again, that's a kind of core part of a shift from project to product. It can be slower. I think engage finance. They're usually interested, like project reallocations and always seeing things in the rearview mirror is not what all finance departments love. They would like to have some more predictive models typically. Not to say that those things change overnight, but shifting to product is about shifting to capacity-based funding, right? You're funding a value stream and this capacity, and you're being realistic about, again, as we said at the start, right? To answer Joseph's questions, is just get them to start looking at capacity and understanding that they can fund, and it needs to be data-driven, which finance likes to hear, because oftentimes there are challenges with technologies that nothing's data-driven, or the data is not meaningful, or it's all story points, which I'll never forget when I first told our new CFO, it was 6 years ago, is like, what we measure story points, and I think he almost walked out the door. That sounded so strange. And he came from lean manufacturing. is get them engaged around the flow metrics, because they tend to like those kinds of things. It gives them another way of measuring them. It gives them a predictive mechanism, and it helps them shift towards understanding capacity-based funding. Is that we have this much capacity on this value stream. If we want to increase it, these are the actions we need to take, as we talked about at the start. And then we're going to measure whether the capacity increased, because they're just as frustrated as everyone else about these projects getting endlessly delayed. So finance can be, I think, and the PMO, by the way, I think, in spite of the title of the book, the PMO, the project managers also want better predictability as well, right? We all do. So engaging finance or the project management office can be a really helpful catalyst for this.
Right.
But in the end, it's about shifting to capacity-based funding. And I think it all goes back to what we're talking about with Joseph's questions at the start, is that mismatch of the project funding from the actual capacity. That's what we need to unwind, and that's what the flow metrics are meant to do. So, and the challenge is you do need some buy-in in terms of, but you can do it in a way where there's sort of, two sets of measurement systems, two sets of books, where the project funding is still there, but we're actually measuring and managing this team to capacity and assuming they have fixed capacity until we see the capacity grow.
Great. A question we received from Mohan, and feel free to elaborate on your question, Mohan, but his question is, do flow metrics influence the transformation of an organization, or how would you measure the actual transformation efforts?
Yeah, so they don't. So in themselves, they don't, because all you're doing is measuring and finding bottlenecks. But it gives you a data-driven way of understanding, did we improve? Was our hypothesis right? That the transformation initiatives we're undertaking, whether it's technology, staffing, competency, training, all these kinds of things, did they improve the flow or did they not? So it just gives you a data-driven feedback loop on your transformation, which I think is transformational, because it's, again, it just gives you a way of guiding, whether it's the roadmap for your transformation. And it really is as simple as making your transformation itself be more lean and agile, because you've got a feedback loop on how it's going. And the irony, of course, of a lot of these transformations is they're completely waterfall.
Do you have any metrics to measure transformation?
Yeah, it's just the flow metrics. That's what we're meant to do. And you pick one, usually. So just pick flow time. And flow time is one of the, I think, the best guides to transformation. Your flow time should be decreasing every quarter if your transformation is going well. So you need a baseline. Is it 6 months? Is it 120 days? Is it 180 days? And that's the end-to-end flow time. It's not how long it takes an agile team to close a user story. It's how long it took business value from how it came in, because it could have come in as a requirement or a project or a business epic, to when you had running software, and you measure that, and that's the #1 guide for your transformation. Now, when your flow time gets so short, we at Tasktop, we always track it, but we don't manage to flow time, because it's, again, as I mentioned at the start, if it's under 2 weeks. Is it better if it's 10 days than 12 days? I don't know. But I know our velocity is really important. I know, so when it's that short, once under sprint, your learning loop is fast enough. So yeah, but in terms of starting point, the #1 flow metric is, there's only 4 flow metrics. The #1 metric is flow time. And of course, the other ones are important, because one of the main reasons that transformations get messed up is flow load. The teams get completely overloaded with transforming while they're delivering at the same time. So the transformation actually makes their flow load higher. Their work in progress gets worse because they're being asked to change. And if you now got a cloud and agile transformation going, as part of the digital transformation, they're being asked to change the technology stack, change their ways of working, and to still deliver. So you now just completely overloaded them. So your capacity got even worse while you're trying to do more. So that's why the flow load metric is there. But fundamentally, is almost kind of a safeguard to understand what is this sustainable flow load for these teams to do. Because if we're asking them to change, chances are we have to reprioritize some of what's on their backlog. But yeah, the flow time is the #1 transformation metric. It should be reducing every quarter. And the reductions in flow time are really meaningful, right?
Right. Yeah.
In terms of what the business and the people are feeling.
So to continue on that, question that we have is, are there best practices or solutions that can be implemented as a result to poor performance on the flow metrics?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think the thing, and this gets back to the point of psychological safety, but measure your flow and you'll see a bunch of bad flow metrics. And, and then it's about making a roadmap of improvement around those, right? And just making that part of planning. And in some places you'll see some good ones, and you should ask why. Why is feature delivery, the flow distribution of features higher here? Is it because they're greenfields? Is it some new technology they're using? Why are we doing better here? But I think it's really important for the value streams and the teams themselves to come up with the experiments to improve their flow. And again, like I said, the training stuff, some of those will be systemic and across the organization, but it really does have to do with technology, with organizational design. So technology and architecture, organizational design, and processes. So it's just kind of everything. You can't improve everything overnight. So what you want to know is what's the bottleneck, because any flow system, there's only ever one bottleneck, right? That's what the theory of constraints is. And if you're investing anywhere other than the bottleneck, you're wasting your time. So you need to know what the bottleneck is. Is it a talent, a resource, a process, a technology, an architecture bottleneck? Invest there, and then next quarter you look for the next bottleneck. And those investments should be experiments as well, because you should be able to measure the outcome. When we trained people, we all thought that, we had, David and I were laughing about training everyone on Agile, or on cloud on AWS. Well, now we trained everyone. Did it work? Or maybe we gave them terrible training. Maybe the training provider we provided was, they flopped. And so I think it's really important to measure, to both invest to see the bottleneck, to invest in the bottleneck, and then to measure the outcome in terms of flow. And just to create a discipline of doing that.
Great. A question we have in the chat: are there any tools out there that you recommend or that Tasktop uses to help measure flow in OKRs?
Yeah, so for flow, I mean, we've made the business around measuring flow. So Tasktop Viz is the tool that we measure flow with, on top of course, the existing tool chains, because we like everyone else, we have a suite of tools. We have our product management tools, we have our Agile tools, our DevOps tools, and Service Desk and the like. So the OKRs has been interesting. We have support in Tasktop for putting in, basically ingesting OKRs effectively. There's just it's interesting. There's such a broad range of OKR tools. So I see both ourselves and our customers flip-flopping between tools and Confluence and sometimes spreadsheets. I think some of them are. I think they're getting better. The OKRs tools will mature. It just really depends whether you're 100, 1,000, or 10,000 people, or tens of thousands of people. What kind of OKR tool will work for you? And yeah, there are just so many different out there right now. So I've not seen, it's been interesting, I've not seen sort of a convergence on one across the transformations that I work with. But I do think even if OKR, and the neat thing with OKRs, by the way, is that they're simple. We actually took one of the missteps that we took early on with our OKR tools, that an OKR tool a few years ago, was that we basically turned into almost like a waterfall tool of cascaded tasks. And that's not what you want. I think the power of OKRs is that you actually keep them simple at each level, and you limit how many they are. And that's what they're so good at. So even if you're using OKRs more manually in, I don't know, SharePoint or Confluence or something, there's still a great, that's the simplicity of them makes it feasible to do that. But then of course you want those OKRs to cascade into your tools where you're managing flow, as well as into your roadmaps and your Agile tools. So, and some of the Agile tools have support for OKRs now as well, and the PPM tools too.
Awesome. All right, we're almost at time, so I'm going to close out with a question from Alvin and Norm, which is, when are you going to write your equivalent of the Phoenix Project, and what have you learned since Project to Product was published?
Oh, like a business fable? Yeah. So I don't know. It's been, sometimes it's on my mind. Yeah, right now I'm still in the learning mode. So, and helping organizations transform. But yeah, all those learnings, there's definitely some fables forming in my head. So, but yeah, I don't know if the next one, and I'm just sort of, sketching out all the learnings, trying to, learn and share out in these communities on the podcast and the like. But yeah, I think there's definitely some sort of interesting sort of things that have happened, and seeing adoption of the flow framework and the role of things like OKRs and managing outcomes, understanding how important platforms are and helping organizations move toward those. And then of course, some of the more culture and people oriented things like the psychological safety that Rena mentioned. So so yeah, so the answer is I don't know. Ask me next time. Thanks everyone. Have a great
rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you.